I have been living with my grandparents for 6 months, and my grandfather just called my work behind my back to get me out of a shift. So here's the situation. My parents are doctors doing a 2-year medical mission in Africa. They left about 6 months ago, leaving me and my younger brother in the care of our grandparents. We had to move from our suburban home to their place in this tiny rural town about 40 miles from anywhere important. There's basically no public transportation out here. I've been making the best of things. 3 months ago, I managed to get a job at the local grocery store. The shifts are mostly evenings ending at 10 p.m., but it's giving me some financial independence, and I'm saving up for college next year. My grandparents were initially supportive, or at least they said they were. The problem is that my grandparents are super inconsistent with how they treat us. With me, they have all these strict rules, curfews, asking where I'm going all the time, monitoring my phone usage, despite the fact that I'll literally be 18 in a few days. But with my brother, whenever he has any complaints about anything, they tell him to man up and stop being childish. Yesterday, things came to a head. My grandfather announced at dinner that I needed to volunteer with him at this senior food drive on Saturday afternoon. I already had my work schedule for the week, and I was scheduled for a shift during that exact time. I tried to be reasonable about it. I calmly explained that I couldn't just not show up for a scheduled shift without risking my job. I even offered a compromise where he could drop me off early at work so I could still help with setup before my shift started. I also said I'd volunteer twice next month to make up for it. The second I finished talking, my grandfather's face turned red. He started going off about how I'm always putting work before family and thinking money is more important than helping others. When I tried explaining again about how work schedules function in the real world, he stood up, grabbed his car keys, and announced he was going for a drive. It was nearly dark outside at this point, which immediately concerned me because my grandfather has severe vision problems. He's blind in one eye, and the other isn't great, especially at night. I followed him outside, trying to get him to calm down and not drive while upset. As he backed out of the driveway, he nearly hit the mailbox. My grandmother came running out behind me and immediately turned on me saying, "Now look what you made him do. You know he shouldn't be driving when he's upset." I tried telling her that I didn't make him do anything. He's a grown adult making his own choices. But she cut me off, saying I should know better than to contradict his grandfather. I spent the next hour waiting for him to return, worried about his safety and frustrated at being blamed for his dangerous decision to drive while angry and vision impaired. The whole situation felt unfair. I'm being treated like a child who caused a problem, but also being held responsible for an adult's reckless behavior. When my grandfather finally returned, he acted like nothing had happened. No apology, no acknowledgement of the stress he caused, nothing. But then he casually mentioned that he had called my manager and arranged for me to have Saturday off. He did this without asking me or even telling me first. To clarify, since many are asking, no, my grandparents don't have legal guardianship paperwork. My parents set up a notarized letter giving them temporary care authority while they're overseas, but nothing court established. They send my grandparents money each month for our expenses, which I only know because I saw one of the transfer receipts. I'm absolutely livid about him calling my workplace behind my back. It's completely undermining my independence and professionalism. I've worked hard to build a good reputation there, and now my manager probably thinks I'm some kid who has his grandfather call in for him. What makes this even more frustrating is that my grandfather constantly talks about how kids these days need to learn responsibility and understand the value of work. But the second my job conflicts with what he wants, suddenly my commitments don't matter. The hypocrisy is unreal. I only have a few weeks until graduation and my 18th birthday, so I'm trying to keep the peace until then. But I'm also worried about my college plans. I got accepted to a state school about 80 miles from here, and I've been counting on this job to help cover expenses my financial aid won't. If my grandfather keeps interfering with my work, I'm not sure how I'll manage financially. My brother is on my side, but he's only 13, and there's not much he can do. I haven't been able to contact my parents about this because they're currently in a remote area with very limited communication. The last email I got from them mentioned they might even extend their stay for another year. I'm torn between standing up for myself more firmly and just trying to keep my head down until I can move out. My grandparents are doing us a favor by taking us in, and I don't want to seem ungrateful. But at the same time, I'm almost an adult and need to be able to make my own decisions and commitments. I just don't know how to address this boundary violation without creating more conflict in the house. Is it unreasonable to expect my grandfather to respect my work schedule and not interfere with my job? I feel like I'm losing my mind sometimes with how they swing between treating me like a child and then expecting adult responsibility from me. Thanks for reading all this. Any advice on dealing with controlling grandparents when you're stuck living with them would be appreciated. I'm trying to be respectful, but also maintain some independence as I transition to adulthood. Now for the first update. First, I just want to say wow to everyone who commented on my last post. Seriously, rip my inbox. I've read every single comment, and your advice has been incredibly helpful during this whole grandparent situation. So it's been about a week since my grandfather pulled that stunt with calling my workplace, and things have gotten interesting. I went to work the day after everything happened, dreading what I might find out. Sure enough, my manager pulled me aside as soon as I clocked in. Apparently, my grandfather had called claiming I had some kind of family emergency that required my presence on Saturday. Eye roll. My manager was actually pretty cool about it, but gave me this whole speech about proper communication channels and how I needed to be the one to discuss schedule changes in the future. I just stood there, nodding, completely mortified that my grandfather had made me look like some kid who can't handle his own job responsibilities. When I got home that evening, I decided I needed to have an actual conversation with my grandparents about boundaries. I figured if I approached it calmly and maturely, maybe they'd actually listen. Spoiler alert, I was being way too optimistic. Right before I was going to talk to them, I checked my email and found a message from my parents. The email was mostly updates about their work, but they mentioned at the end that they're considering extending their stay in Africa for another year. This news made establishing boundaries with my grandparents even more important, since I might be stuck with them way longer than planned. I asked my brother to give us some privacy for this conversation, but my grandmother insisted he stay to learn how families resolve conflicts, which is ironic considering what happened next. We all sat at the kitchen table, and I started by thanking them for taking us in, but explained that I felt undermined by Grandpa calling my workplace without talking to me first. I barely finished my first sentence before my grandfather interrupted me. He went on this whole lecture about how I should be grateful they've given us a place to stay and that under their roof, they make the decisions about how I spend my time. When I mentioned that I'd be 18 soon and needed to learn to manage my own commitments, my grandmother reminded me about all the sacrifices they've made taking in 2 extra people at their age. The emotional manipulation was so obvious. She started saying how my attitude was breaking my grandfather's heart and reminded me about all the sacrifices they've made, taking in 2 extra people at their age. I was trying to stay calm, but then my brother unexpectedly spoke up. He said it wasn't fair that they expected me to act like a child while telling him to man up whenever he complained about anything. Proud big brother moment, not gonna lie. My grandfather immediately pointed his finger at my brother and told him to stay out of adult conversations. The irony was completely lost on him that he was simultaneously treating me like a child while calling this an adult conversation that my brother shouldn't participate in. When I calmly pointed out this double standard, my grandfather declared the conversation over. I started to leave the room, thinking at least I'd tried, when my grandfather announced that he'd decided I would be giving up my weekend job entirely to help with family responsibilities until my parents returned. Not asked, not discussed, decided, for me, about my job. I spent that entire evening researching whether my grandfather could legally force me to quit my job at almost 18. The laws aren't super clear given my weird guardianship situation. My parents sent my grandparents a notarized letter giving them temporary authority, but it's not court-established guardianship. Plus, I'll be 18 in literally less than 2 weeks, which changes everything legally. That night, I overheard my grandparents arguing about me through the walls. My grandmother was saying something about them being too old for this, while my grandfather kept insisting he wouldn't lose control of the household. It was pretty clear this was about his control issues, more than actual concern for me. The next morning, I called my workplace and explained the situation honestly to my manager. I was worried she'd just fire me, especially after the family emergency call, but she was surprisingly understanding. She offered a compromise. I could adjust my schedule to one weekday evening and Sunday mornings. This would free up Saturdays for my grandfather's community activities while still letting me keep my job and some independence. When I presented this compromise to my grandparents, my grandfather initially refused. He kept saying I didn't understand family priorities and that I was being selfish, his favorite word lately. But my grandmother, surprisingly, took my side. She pointed out that I was being responsible by finding a middle ground and that my grades hadn't suffered since I started working. After some back and forth, my grandfather reluctantly agreed, though he made it clear he wasn't happy about it. The last week has been this weird period of tension in the house. My grandfather barely speaks to me except to give instructions about chores or criticize something I've done. My grandmother tries to play peacemaker but mostly just enables his behavior. My brother is caught in the middle, trying not to draw attention to himself. To answer some common questions from the comments. 1. No, my grandparents don't have legal guardianship paperwork beyond my parents' notarized letter. 2. Yes, I've tried calling my parents, but they're in an area with very limited communication right now. 3. No, I don't have other relatives I could stay with nearby. 4. Yes, I'm still planning to go to college in the fall, which is partly why I need this job. Edit. A lot of you asked about why I don't just move out now. The main issue is financial. I've saved about $1,200 from my job, but in our area that would barely cover first month's rent and security deposit, let alone utilities and food. Plus, most landlords won't rent to someone under 18, and I'd have to find something within walking distance of my job since I don't have a car. I've considered it, believe me, but it's just not feasible until I turn 18 and have a bit more saved up. The most frustrating part of all this is that my grandfather keeps contradicting himself. One minute, he's lecturing me about responsibility and work ethic. The next, he's undermining my actual job. One day, he says I need to act more grown up. The next, he's making decisions for me. The constant back and forth is giving me emotional whiplash. I'm hoping things will improve once I officially turn 18, which is coming up fast. At that point, they technically can't force me to do anything. I've been looking into my college housing options to see if there's any way I could move into the dorms early. Several commenters suggested I talk to my guidance counselor at school about my situation, which I'm planning to do tomorrow. She might know about resources for students in tough home situations. For now, I'm just trying to keep my head down, work my adjusted schedule, and count the days until my birthday. I'm mentally preparing myself for whatever new boundary violations my grandfather might attempt next. We'll update when there's something new to share. Now for the second update. Update 2. Well, I thought my last post about my controlling grandfather would be the final chapter in this saga, but apparently the universe had other plans for me. Thanks to everyone who commented with advice and support. It's been about 2 weeks since my grandparents reluctantly agreed to my work compromise, and we've been living in a tense environment ever since. My grandfather barely speaks to me except to give instructions or make passive-aggressive comments about my priorities. I've been sticking to my new schedule, working Wednesday evenings and Sunday mornings while participating in his community activities on Saturdays. It's not ideal for my bank account, but at least I still have some independence and income. The biggest milestone is that I finally turned 18 a few days ago. I was hoping this would transform how my grandparents treat me, but nothing really changed. My grandmother did bake my favorite cake, and my grandfather gave me a card with a $50 gift certificate to a local restaurant. We had this awkward little celebration where everyone pretended things were normal, even though the tension was significant. The day after my birthday, I got some amazing news. I was accepted to State University. I also received a partial financial aid package that would cover about 60% of the costs, which is honestly better than I expected. I've been working on scholarship applications like crazy to try to cover the rest, along with using my job savings. When I shared this news at dinner, my grandparents had a mixed reaction. My grandmother said, "That's nice, dear," in a tone that clearly meant it wasn't nice at all, while my grandfather just grunted and kept eating. Nobody asked any questions about the program or congratulated me or anything. Later that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table working on more scholarship applications when my grandfather came in with a stack of printed materials. Without saying anything, he pushed my laptop aside and spread out brochures for community colleges within driving distance of their house. "These are sensible options," he said, pointing to a 2-year program at a college literally 10 minutes from their house. "You can live here, save money, and transfer later if you still want to." While I was trying to process this situation, I noticed my financial aid award letters, which I had specifically put in my desk drawer in my bedroom, were opened. He had gone through my things, found my private documents, and opened them without asking me. "Did you go through my room?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. He waved his hand dismissively. "There are no privacy laws between family members," he said. "I'm just looking out for your interests. Your grandmother and I think it's irresponsible to take on debt when there are perfectly good options close to home." My grandmother joined us then. "Your parents would surely prefer you stayed close where we can keep an eye on you rather than running off to live with strangers," she said. I explained as calmly as I could that I'd already discussed my college options with my parents via email months ago. They had encouraged me to apply to schools that fit my educational goals, not just pick the closest option. My grandfather said, "So you've been going behind our backs? Manipulating your parents who are too far away to know what's really best for you?" I pulled out my phone to show him the supportive emails from my parents about college applications. Before I could even unlock it, he snatched it from my hands and placed it on top of the refrigerator. "We need to have this conversation without distractions," he said, crossing his arms. "Your parents put us in charge of your well-being, and we don't think you're making sound decisions." What my grandfather didn't notice was that my brother had come into the kitchen and started recording the whole interaction on his tablet. When my grandfather finally spotted him filming, he immediately shut down, mumbled something about discussing this later, and retreated to his bedroom. I grabbed a chair and retrieved my phone once they both left. For the rest of the night, everyone just avoided each other. Typical healthy family communication, right? The next morning, I found my phone on my nightstand with a note from my grandmother. She apologized for my grandfather overreacting, but asked me to be more understanding of his fear of being left behind. She wrote that they only want what's best for me and that living close to home would be safer and more practical. The note ended with, "We just don't think you're ready for so much independence yet," which is ironic, coming from people who won't even let me have independence while living under their roof. I immediately emailed my parents a detailed account of everything that's been happening, trying not to sound like I was just complaining, but genuinely asking for their input on the college situation. Within minutes, I got an auto reply saying they would be in a remote area with limited communication for the next 3 weeks. Since then, things have gotten even more tense. My grandfather keeps leaving community college brochures on my bed. My grandmother keeps making comments about young people making impulsive decisions they regret later. My brother tells me our grandfather was Googling how to cancel a college acceptance on the family computer. I've been communicating with the financial aid office at State University, and I need to submit a $500 housing deposit by the end of the month to secure my dorm room. I have the money saved, but I'm worried my grandfather might try to interfere somehow. Some commenters suggested I should open a new bank account now that I'm 18, and I'm definitely planning to do that this week. My guidance counselor at school has been amazing through all this. When I told her what was happening, she offered to call my grandparents to discuss my college transition plan, hoping that having another adult validate my choices might help. I haven't taken her up on it yet because I'm worried it might just make my grandfather dig his heels in more, but it's nice to have the option. For those wondering why I don't just move out now that I'm 18, I'm still saving up and dorms don't open until August. Plus, I'm worried about my brother if I leave. He's been my ally through all this, and I don't want to abandon him to deal with them alone. He still has nearly 5 years before he turns 18. I'm planning to increase my work hours now that I'm officially an adult and my grandfather can't legally interfere. My manager has already agreed to give me more shifts once school ends next month. The goal is to save enough to cover all my expenses for freshman year, in case my grandparents try to exert control through financial means. At this point, I'm just taking it day by day, working on scholarship applications, and counting down the days until I can move into the dorms. Thanks again for all your support and advice. It's genuinely helping me stay sane through this mess. Now for the final update. Final update on my controlling grandparents situation. Still can't believe it's over. First off, thank you to everyone who followed this wild ride and offered advice. You've been my lifeline through this absolute nightmare. It's been 3 weeks since my last update, and wow, things escalated fast. The tension in our house reached after the college acceptance situation. My grandfather went from passive-aggressive to just plain aggressive, leaving community college brochures everywhere. Seriously, I found one in the cereal box. My grandmother kept making these sad sighs whenever I walked into a room. With my parents still unreachable in their remote location, I focused on what I could control, working my reduced hours, applying for many scholarships, and counting down the days until August. The housing deposit deadline for my dorm room was approaching fast, $500 due by the end of the month. Not a small amount, but I'd been saving carefully and knew I had enough in my account. Then came the news that nearly broke me. I logged into my bank account to make the transfer and immediately noticed something was wrong. My balance was $200 lower than it should have been. Scrolling through my recent transactions, I found a withdrawal I definitely hadn't made. And yes, I triple-checked. At first, I thought my account had been hacked, but deep down, I already suspected the truth. I casually asked my brother if he knew anything about it, trying not to freak him out. The look on his face told me everything before he even spoke. He confessed he'd overheard our grandparents discussing borrowing money from my account for car repairs a few days earlier. Apparently, my grandfather had assured my grandmother I wouldn't even notice, and they'd pay it back eventually. Spoiler alert, I noticed. I spent the entire day at work processing this information and planning my approach. I needed that money for my housing deposit, but more importantly, this was unacceptable. Taking my money without permission wasn't just controlling, it was theft, and yes, I Googled it. This is illegal even between family members. That evening, I finally received an email from my parents. Their satellite connection was spotty, but they expressed concern about everything that had been happening. They promised to try to arrange a visit in about 6 weeks, not exactly helpful for my immediate situation, but confirmed they fully supported my college choice and would speak to my grandparents. However, I appreciated the backup. Armed with my bank statement and a newfound determination, I asked my grandparents to sit down with me after dinner. My brother made himself scarce, smart kid, and I calmly placed my bank statement on the table with the mysterious withdrawal highlighted. The look that passed between them confirmed everything before they even spoke. My grandfather looked away while my grandmother sighed deeply. "We were going to tell you," she said. "The car needed repairs and we were short that month. We meant to put it back before you noticed." My grandfather finally looked up. "It's not like we stole it. We're family. We've been taking care of you, feeding you, housing you. What's yours is ours." I remained calm but firm, explaining that taking money from my account without permission wasn't borrowing. It was theft, even from family members. My grandfather's face reddened as he started listing all the ways they'd provided for me, eventually claiming they deserved compensation for everything they'd done. "Mom and Dad have been sending you money every month specifically for our care," I said. His face went pale. He clearly hadn't realized I knew about that arrangement. My parents had mentioned it in passing in an email months ago, and I'd filed that information away for safekeeping. What happened next was something I never expected. There was a knock at the door, and when my grandmother opened it, my high school guidance counselor was standing there. I'd been confiding in her about the situation for months. As many of you suggested, having an adult advocate is crucial, but I hadn't asked her to come over. She explained that after our last conversation, she'd been worried enough to contact my parents via the emergency satellite number they'd left with the school. They had authorized her to help me navigate the situation and had even arranged for me to stay with her family until my dorm opened in August if necessary, something I did not anticipate. My grandfather's face changed as he realized his leverage was disappearing. He tried to maintain that he'd done nothing wrong, that he was just trying to protect me from making mistakes, but it was clear his influence was ending. The next morning, I found an envelope on my bed containing $200 in cash. No note, no apology. Shocking, I know. My grandmother couldn't even look me in the eye at breakfast. and my grandfather remained in his room the entire day, sulking, I assume. With my guidance counselor's help, I opened a new bank account at a different bank where my grandparents had no connections. I transferred all my savings there and set up paperless statements that would only go to my email. To everyone who told me to secure my finances, you were right. I paid my housing deposit that afternoon. Such a relief. The rest of the week was tense, but oddly peaceful. My grandparents seemed to realize they'd lost this battle, and while they weren't happy about it, they stopped actively interfering with my plans. My grandmother occasionally tried to make small talk, asking about my classes or what I was planning to pack for the dorms, but my grandfather remained distant. Still hasn't made direct eye contact with me, actually. My brother is sad that I'll be leaving, but I've promised to call him every day and visit often. I've also arranged with my guidance counselor to keep an eye on him and be a point of contact if he needs help while I'm gone. I'm worried about leaving him there, but he's assured me he'll be fine. And honestly, my grandparents have always treated him better than me anyway. The golden child syndrome is real, folks. I'll be moving in with my guidance counselor's family next week for the summer, still processing how incredibly generous this offer is. It feels weird to be packing up my things, but also incredibly freeing. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe. Edit. To clarify, my parents aren't terrible people who abandoned us. They're doctors working in a remote clinic, and while their communication has been spotty, they've always supported my independence. They just didn't realize how controlling my grandparents would be when they arranged for us to stay with them. They're coming back for a visit in 6 weeks, and we'll figure out a better arrangement for my brother then. Life after my grandfather's controlling behavior is still an adjustment. Sometimes I catch myself asking permission to do normal things, but I'm in a much better place now than I ever thought possible, and I'm actually excited about the future again.